All right, another video on the Forgotten Isles. In this in this section, we're going to be talking about the different classes. Now, there are 3 classes you can play in the Forgotten Isles, and of course, you can mix and match classes to kind of make a character that is completely unique. And on top of that, there are 3 subclasses within each of the 3 classes. So there's a mage you can play, there is an assassin, and there is a warrior. So let's look at the mage. The mage is a practitioner of magic, for good or for ill, and a student of the sacred and arcane text. The mage has 3 subclasses, 9 specialties that are listed below. The first is the elemental mage. This is a mage that controls frost and fire and the elements, and there are 3 different subclass specialties for the elemental mage. You can first use a spell called Frost and Flame. You can use another called Trapped in Ice, which freezes your enemies. And you can finally use one at the top tier called Frenzied Fire, in which all enemies on the battlefield are dealt damage equivalent to their wisdom rating times 2. The second subclass is the Necromancer, and they're kind of a scary, a dark class. They're not necessarily the good guys, you know. They can cast a spell called From the Grave, where they can resurrect a fallen enemy. They have a spell called the Black Hand, where they deal damage to an enemy, especially if the enemy is of a divine alignment. And thirdly, the Kiss of Death, which is a spell in which all enemies on the battlefield are dealt damage equivalent to the wisdom rating times the roll of your die. And the final class the subclass, and the mage you can play is called a priest. You can do something called a quick heal, which will allow you to heal a party member based on a die roll times their defense rating. You can also use a spell called Shroud of Protection, which is an interesting spell because it allows you to actually increase the defense rating of all members in your party based on your die roll again. And this lasts for 1 turn. There's another spell, the top tier spell here in the priest class is called Divine Rebirth, where you can resurrect a fallen member of your party with full stats by rolling a 5 or a 6. So sort of a chancy move on the part of the priest there. If you could do that, though, it could be very, very important and very game-changing in your campaign. The second class is the Assassin, and I wrote here that the Assassin is the master of trickery and shadows. Would be a good class to play with a goblin. Using poisons and daggers, the Assassin is the ideal build for a lone wolf. And the Assassin has 3 subclasses and 9 subclass specialties like the mage that are listed below. So we have the Potion Master. We can poison weapons, create a potion which will make characters or NPCs tell the truth. And you have an upper tier, final tier level called Set Snare, where you can inflict 3 times damage for a single enemy without being noticed, which could be particularly useful. There is also a subclass called the Shadow Cloak, and this is one that uses dual-wielding daggers. You can use a attack called Slice and Dice, which deals damage to a single enemy based on your die roll. You have a move called Face of Death, where you can cast fear into the heart of an enemy and cause them to flee for the number of turns rolled by your die. And the final ability for Shadow Cloak subclass is Knife in the Dark, or essentially being able to one-shot an enemy, kill them outright by rolling a 5 or a 6. And the final subclass we have for the Assassin is the Sharpshooter. And this is one of the few, aside from the Mage, this is really the only other, what would you call it? This is really the only other only subclass that allows you to deal damage from afar before actually encountering your enemy. You have something called Quick Shot, which is damage. Friendly Fire, where you can actually help a party member when it's not your turn by dealing stealth times 0.5 damage. So half your stealth can be dealt to assist another party member when it's their turn. That would be very helpful if you were trying to assist a priest or a class that was more focused on healing rather than dealing damage and had a low defense rating. The third you can use is called Rain of Tear, R-A-I-N, where you can essentially rain down arrows in a battle and affect multiple enemies based on your stealth rating times roll. And the final class we have is the Warrior. And the Warrior is the master of the sword and is of immense physical threat to any and all enemies that he or she will encounter. The warrior may call upon divine magic to aid his or her companions. The warrior has 3 subclasses and 9 subclass specialties that are listed below. So the first class we have is called the Sword Bearer, which is a warrior that uses a double-handed sword. And we'll see that this is really one of the highest damage dealing classes in the game, but there are some sacrifices that you make to your defense. We have something called Hard Hit, where you can deal strength times 3 damage to an enemy, but your defense is compromised by defense times 0.5 for 1 turn. We have another specialty called Storm or Sword Storm. Storm of Swords might be a better way to phrase it. I'll have to revise it. Where you have strength times 2 damage to a group of enemies, but your defense is compromised by defense times 0.75 for 1 turn. So you're dealing 2 times your strength damage to a group of enemies, but your defense is very much compromised because you're again using that 2-handed sword. And then the final one, which is kind of a Ned Stark Game of Thronesy one, is called Behead. And like the rogue or the assassin, you can one-shot an enemy, kill them outright by rolling a 5 or a 6. The second class we have is called the Martyr. This is a sword and shield bearing subclass. In the Martyr, you have Block and Shock, where you can attack an enemy and actually sort of incapacitate them for 1 turn. We have the second ability called Protect, which is strength times 0.5 damage dealt to an enemy that a member of your party is fighting during their turn. So you're essentially protecting a party member for half the strength damage that you have invested in your abilities. So much like the assassin in that way. And the final one for the Martyr is called Charge, and strength times 2 damage dealt to a single enemy with a chance to shock and incapacitate the member for a number of turns rolled by your die. So really, that would be a great way to start a battle, by charging. If you could get to that level of subclass specialty, that would be an excellent way to start that, because you could effectively wound them incredibly and also incapacitate them for a number of max 6 turns. And the final subclass on the warrior is called the Paladin, and this is like a holy warrior. You have something called Smite, which is strength times 2 damage dealt to a single enemy, and strength times 3 damage if the enemy is an undead or a vampire. Number 2 is a sort of spell. It's called Battle Blessing, and this increases the strength rating of all members of your party, depending on your roll, 1 through 6, times their strength rating. So it'd be 1/6 through a full 100%, depending on your die roll. And this protection lasts for 1 turn. Then you have something called Divine Fury. All enemies on the battlefield are dealt damage equivalent to your wisdom rating times 2. Wisdom rating times 3 if the enemies are undead or vampire. So with that particular class and that particular high tier subclass specialty, you need to have invested some serious points in your wisdom ability in order to get the full effect. That's kind of what makes the paladin, because it is both a warrior and a priest. And so in the next video, what we'll talk about the attributes and the way that specialty points work in this game, The Forgotten Isles.